It's the Bob McCown podcast, yours truly, along with John Shannon for this Wednesday hump day. I hope you're all well and staying safe as we await.
What is this, a new look? Is this a new look?
What look is that, John?
You're walking around like Phil Donahue.
I'm not walking around at all. I'm sitting down on my chair.
I know.
As you are. I am actually holding my microphone.
Hey, would you break it or something? You broke it.
Broke the bleeping stand. So
nice going. Yeah, well, we'll have the people look at that. We'll have our people.
I don't have any people. Kenny Albert joins us, who needs no introduction. He is, if not the only, at least one of the very few broadcasters that does the four major sports. Are you the only one, Kenny, that does them all?
As far as I know, I'm the only one currently, but there have been many others. I know there's a list out there. There have been at least 10 to 15 others that have done all four at various times, dating back to Marty Glickman, Bob Wolf back in the 1950s and 60s. But at the current time, I'm pretty sure I'm the only one.
Well, the cycle of broadcasters, I mean, there was a time when in both countries, Canada and the United States, where everybody had to be versatile and you had to do it. But then we got into the world of being a specialist, of just doing one sport. But it's, and of course, I mean, you don't have any pedigree in this game. You know, nobody in your family knows how to broadcast between your dad and your two uncles. So you can see why you have a little bit of an opportunity to broaden your horizon, Kenny.
You know, I always joke, John and Bob, that family get-togethers back when I was growing up in the 70s, early 80s, it felt like the first all-sports radio station, because I would sit around the table and just soak everything in via osmosis when my uncles would come over. And it was just such a great learning experience. I would listen to the stories that they would tell about the various teams and the networks. And as you know, John, my dream was to do hockey on the radio. That was what I wanted to do growing up. When we first met, I was working for the Baltimore Skipjacks of the American Hockey League, and then Home Team Sports in Washington. And hockey was really the dream, and was very fortunate to get involved at a young age. And then, things sort of developed from there. At Home Team Sports, I was asked to fill in on some college basketball and then NBA basketball and some Orioles baseball games. And then in late 1993, Rupert Murdoch makes this crazy, wild, unexpected bid for the NFC football package in the U.S., stolen away from CBS. And I never had any thought, that I would ever have the opportunity of working NFL games on television, especially at such a young age. And once Fox pulled the NFC rights away from CBS, a number of young broadcasters, myself, Joe Buck, Tom Brenneman, Kevin Harlan, we were all in the right place at the right time. And Fox decided to go with the veteran crews, the Hall of Famers, Pat Summerall and John Madden, Dick Stockton and Matt Millen as the top two crews. And the rest of us, the guys that I just named, had this unbelievable opportunity back in 1994. And it's crazy to think that here we are 27 seasons later.
I'm intrigued by your fondness for hockey. What's the genesis of that?
Hey, hold on. What he didn't tell you, and I'm going to say it before he will, what he didn't tell you is that when he wanted to do a play-by-play, he probably wanted to do play-by-play of the Vancouver Canucks. Early on in his days when he was sitting on in either Madison Square Garden or the Nassau Coliseum. Is that fair, Kenny?
That's pretty fair. Somehow at a really young age, despite having a father who was the radio voice of the Rangers and uncles who worked for the Islanders at the time, and then later on for the Devils, I somehow became a Vancouver Canucks fan at the age of 5 or 6. And I still have photos. My room was painted in New York Yankees and Vancouver Canucks colors, the old blue and green, which obviously they've gone back to. But on my closet, I had the old original Canucks logo. I kept scrapbooks. I couldn't really see many of the games, obviously, back then on TV or even listen on the radio. But I would wake up in the middle of the night and turn on WINS, the all news radio station. They had sports updates at 15 and 45. Just to hear the score of the Canucks game, because we wouldn't get the box score in the newspaper until 2 days later. No internet back then. So I would literally have to wait 2 days or for the hockey news to arrive every Friday morning to see the Canucks box scores. But I was a huge Canucks fan. I wound up getting to meet Jim Robson, and I would always visit whenever the Canucks played at MSG and the Nassau Coliseum. I also played hockey as a kid, and I was 12 when the U.S. Olympic team won the gold medal in 1980, and I was playing before that. I started skating when I was 2 or 3 years old, but I remember the big boom in, kids on Long Island where I grew up. I would say the numbers doubled or tripled after the Olympic team won in Lake Placid in 1980. I played throughout high school and college on club teams. I wasn't very good. I would characterize myself as a third-line winger who would just go up and down and not score many goals. But the love for hockey was there right from the start.
I find it intriguing. Over the years, I've had the great opportunity to talk to, I would say, almost every prominent broadcaster in America. And John and I have talked to many on this podcast and in the years that we were on radio and television previously. And it is intriguing to me that so many broadcasters have this affinity for hockey, and especially given, its honest status in America as the fourth, even arguably fifth biggest sport. Why do you think that might be, Kenny?
To me, I never looked at it as the fourth or fifth. To me, it was always right up there. And there's nothing like the Stanley Cup playoffs. There's nothing like being in the building, at a hockey game, in my opinion. Now, I've also had the good fortune to work NFL games for 27 years and NBA games and Major League Baseball and playoff games in those sports. And there's also nothing like, when they kick it off at 1 o'clock and, there are millions of people watching. So it's like apples and oranges as far as the comparison from a broadcast standpoint. But I get the question often, Bob, which is the hardest sport to call? And most people expect the answer to be hockey. To me, it's the easiest. It's like riding a bike. I speak with hundreds of high school and college students, aspiring broadcasters every year at various sportscasting camps and these days on Zooms. And they're always intrigued to find out that I find it the easiest. But, once you learn the names, the pronunciations, the puck's in action for 60 minutes. So from a play-by-play standpoint, especially on radio, on TV, obviously you pull back a little bit and leave more time for the color analysts to get in there. But on radio, you're really just calling the game. And basketball is somewhat similar. The ball's in action for 48 minutes. It's slower. There are more whistles. Football is probably the most rhythmic. It's one play and then 15 or 20 or 30 seconds, then another play and then 15 or 20 or 30 seconds. Baseball to me is the most challenging because there's so much time. The ball's only in action. Studies have been done 7 to 12 minutes per game. But calling a hockey game, to me, like I said, it's almost like riding a bike. And, the story that I always tell regarding pronunciations, John and I actually worked together at the 2002 Olympics in Salt Lake. I was hired at the last minute. Doc Emmerich had to pull out about a week before. So I got a call to work men's and women's hockey for NBC in Salt Lake. And obviously it was a huge, life-changing assignment from a professional standpoint. I've been so fortunate to go back to 4 Winter Olympics since then. But one of my first games was a women's hockey game between the U.S. and China. And I figured, well, it's the Olympics. There'll be all this information out there, pronunciation guides, et cetera. And I only have a week to cram now for about 20 different teams on the men's and women's side. And obviously I was familiar with the NHL players, but some of the countries on the men's side were made up of mostly non-NHL players. And then aside from the U.S. and Canadian women's teams, I didn't know much about the other countries. We were handed a pronunciation guide about 5 minutes before the start of that game, U.S. and China. I was working with Joe Micheletti and Lisa Brown Miller. And fortunately, the U.S. dominated. They had the puck for just about the entire game. So especially on TV, I didn't really have to identify too many of the players on Team China. The goalie was nicknamed the Great Wall. So I think she got, she made about 30 saves in the first period. And as long as we identified her as the Great Wall, I think we were okay.
Hey, but so if the money was the same and the ratings were the same, if you could do a game on radio or a game on television, which would you prefer to do?
It's a good question. Well, I think there are so many positives to both. I love both. I've done radio now for 25 years for the Rangers. For the last 15 with Dave Maloney and Sal Messina and Brian Mullen prior to that, great partners. And there's definitely something about radio. I would suggest every young broadcaster start on the radio side. You learn the mechanics. And like I said, for 60 minutes, you're calling the game. But, on television, there's a lot more to deal with as far as replays and promos and the producer and director leading you in certain direction at certain times. And, you kind of have to describe what's going on the screen, whereas on radio, you can pretty much talk about whatever you want. You have to give the story a lot more often. So, again, it's a great question. The money aspect is obviously different. There's more prestige on the TV side. And I guess I'm lucky enough to be involved in both because I enjoy going back and forth between TV and radio. So I know I didn't really answer the question, John, but
no, you didn't, Kenny.
Positive.
With Kenny Albert, I guess we should spend some time. The hockey season has not yet commenced. We don't know when it's going to. We assume it will, or should we assume it will?
Sure, it will.
Optimistic.
Yeah, well, they're fighting amongst themselves, as is quite common, and trying to figure out what to do exactly. The basketball season is a couple of weeks away, and baseball is, of course, in hiatus, although I suppose if baseball was being played in the winter, given the COVID situation, we wouldn't be all that shocked about that. Seasons don't seem to matter anymore. But we're into football, and that is sort of the focus. It would be easy to suggest, Kenny, that the Pittsburgh Steelers are the best team in the NFL right now. Do you feel that way?
I've worked 2 Steeler games so far, and it's hard to argue with the record. You have to put Kansas City right up there, and
Sure.
Such as Green Bay and New Orleans. I certainly look forward to watching what could be a Pittsburgh Kansas City championship game in the AFC. Although there are a couple of other teams that might have something to say about that, but the Steelers, I love Mike Tomlin. I've had the pleasure of spending some time around him through the years, working a number of Steelers games, and I think he's somewhat underrated. I'm not sure if he even gets the credit that he deserves. He has won one Super Bowl, and last year he gets to 8-8 without having Ben Roethlisberger for the last 14 games, mixing and matching with some other quarterbacks, and this year off to the 10-0 start. And as we speak, I'm in Pittsburgh to work the Westwood One broadcast of their 11th game against the Baltimore Ravens. But the 2 teams I worked this season, the win over Philadelphia when British Columbia native Chase Claypool scored 4 touchdowns in that game, and then a win over Cincinnati a couple of weeks later. So you look at their defense, they lead the league in so many categories, interceptions and takeaways, and they score a lot of points on the offensive side. But then again, you have the Kansas City Chiefs who won it all last year, and you look at Patrick Mahomes, and he could go down as one of the greatest of all time. So I'd have to put those 2 teams up there pretty even to one another.
So see, the Tomlin conversation is an interesting one. This is a team that's famous for keeping coaches a long time. Why? First of all, what do you think he does that makes him so effective with his players, and why doesn't he get the respect? Because he's won a Super Bowl. They've had, for the most part, had great winning seasons consistently. What is it that he's doing right, and why don't we talk about him more rather than the other coaches?
I think he does get the respect, but I think maybe he's not talked about as much as he should be in that group with the Belichicks and some of the others who we hold in the highest reverence. I first met Mike Tomlin when he was the defensive backs coach in Tampa Bay, and he just had such an engaging personality. I could tell back then when he was in his 30s that he was such a good people person. He would walk into the room and light up the room and sort of take over. And I worked the last 3 years with Rondé Barber, who played for Tomlin in Tampa Bay, and they became really, really close friends. And just hearing stories about him from Rondé and the type of person he is, the way he's able to motivate teams, Spent some time with him at Rondé's house a couple of years ago, ironically during All-Star Weekend in Tampa. The Pro Bowl was in Orlando, and Mike Tomlin was coaching in Pro Bowl and drove across to Tampa and wound up at Rondé's house one night, and I got to spend some time there as well. And just has the respect of everybody around the league, you know, whether it's management, coaches, players, and 14 straight years without a losing record. That's not easy to do, especially when you lose your quarterback like they did last year.
No, and what's intriguing, too, is that we live in an era where, well, I guess it's not even an era. It's always kind of been this way. Teams get tired of coaches. Teams, the first guy to get the axe, it seems, if something goes wrong, is the coach. And maybe because it's easy. But we also live in an era where the athlete doesn't respect the coaches the way, or fear the coaches, maybe more accurately, Kenny, the way they did perhaps even when we were growing up. What do you think it is specifically about Tomlin that has allowed him to be successful, but not uber successful, and yet there's no question he's the coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers and will be probably for as long as he wants to be?
Right. I think you have to look at the organization. You know, as you guys said, they've only had 3 head coaches since 1969, over 50 years. So
Yeah.
I think the tone is set from the top on down. And when they hired him, he was 35 years old. He wound up winning a Super Bowl at 36, youngest head coach to win a Super Bowl in history. But I think there are certain organizations. Look at the Patriots now with Bill Belichick. He's been there for 2 decades. The Steelers with Tomlin. When Andy Reid was in Philadelphia for over 10 years, and now in Kansas City for quite some time. So I think when those organizations find the right head coach and they wind up building the program and having the success that they've had, I think it says a lot about the ownership and those organizations as well.
Doesn't hurt to have a quarterback that seems to have a pretty good shelf life as well.
Yeah, he does, and it's been an amazing bounce-back season. I actually worked the game against Seattle when he hurt the elbow last year, second week of the season in 2019, and wound up missing the rest of the year. And he's bounced back and has had a tremendous season. So when you look around the league, you know, I'm not sure nobody would have expected the Steelers to be 10-0 at this point, potentially 11-0 if they beat the Ravens today. They won a lot of close games, too. I think 5 of their wins have been by 5 or fewer points, and they've been able to pull out those wins. And both Roethlisberger and the skill players on offense and the defensive side, they've been it's really a team, you know, that has it all when you look at the 3 units: the offense, defense, and the special teams.
Their divisional rivals of the past, not the recent past, I would acknowledge, would be the Cleveland Browns, who are now 8-3. And perhaps emerging as a playoff team. And I confess to you, Kenny, that you know, I'm from Columbus, Ohio, and so I grew up a Browns fan, and have suffered with them for well, since Jim Brown left, really. If you want to be.
And Kenny, that means we've all suffered too. So.
Yes, well, as well you should, Shannon. I don't get the sense that this team is close to being ready, but I assume you've seen them a few times. What do you think?
I have not seen them in person this year, only on TV. You know, we do mostly NFC games, but we do cross over into the AFC more often than we used to. I've seen Pittsburgh twice this year, Miami, Cincinnati, so I've certainly had my share of AFC games. I really like the coach, Kevin Stefanski. Met with him as a coordinator in Minnesota last year. And he grew up around sports. His father, Ed Stefanski, was a general manager in the NBA with Philadelphia and with the New Jersey Nets before they moved to Brooklyn. And, you know, you talk about some of these young coaches and their development. Kevin Stefanski was basically an intern. He told us he was getting Gatorade for Andy Reid and Brad Childress and the Philadelphia Eagles coaches not that long ago. It was around 2005, 6, 7 when he was an intern with the Eagles. And here he is 13 years later as a head coach in the NFL. So he's a great story, grew up around professional sports. I did a couple of Browns games 2 years ago during Baker Mayfield's rookie year, and I was really impressed with him. Just the overall package. Very confident, but I wouldn't say cocky. And I think that translates onto the field. They had a couple of major injuries early in the year, losing Beckham and some others. But, I think it's great when we see teams that haven't had a lot of success over the last decade or two have a season like the Browns are having. So hopefully,
actually, we should just a quick mention. There's always has to be a Canadian tie because Kevin's dad Ed was with the Raptors for 3 years too. So as director of player personnel. So before he went to Detroit, I think. So.
Hey, I mentioned Chase Claypool, the Canadian.
Yes, you did. Yeah, good for you. That's good. Keep the Canadian content going. Hey, the Vikings, where Stefanski came from. You've seen them a great deal recently. What the heck is wrong with the Vikings?
They should probably be better than their 5-6 record. They should probably have 6 or 7 wins. I've actually watched their games the last 2 weeks. They also have some injuries. Adam Thielen was out last week on the COVID reserve list. They lost a number of, I think the big thing early in the season, John, when they started 1-5, they lost 4 or 5 key defensive players, either to injury, opt-out. Some of the players elected to opt out due to the COVID situation. They traded Ngakoue to Baltimore. That was more of a financial deal. So I think defensively, they're real young. And, those players are gaining experience. Kirk Cousins is having a pretty good year. You look at his numbers, and especially over the last 4 games, he had an interception problem early in the season, but he's turned that around. Dalvin Cook is the second leading rusher in the NFL. So I think the big issue early on when they lost 5 of the first 6 games was the defense and losing personnel.
Mm-hmm.
They've done a good job to bounce back. Won 4 out of the last 5. Could have won the Dallas game that I worked 2 weeks ago, and then wind up winning the game this past Sunday. So they're right in the mix. They're only a game out of the last wild card spot with the extra playoff team this year, but their record probably should be a game or 2 better than it is right now.
It's so interesting that we have so many teams still in competition for the postseason. A bunch of teams at 7-4, 8-3, 5 or 6 weeks.
Hey, the 49ers are 5 and the 49ers are 5-6, and they've got to be considered in the hunt.
I don't think there are not a lot of teams out of it at this point. Among the 5 and 6 win teams, they're all right there. Crazy situation in the NFC East with the Giants in first place at 4-7. Washington has 4 wins. Dallas and Philadelphia coming off a tough loss. They're only a game out. So you could have a 6-win team hosting a playoff game coming out of the NFC East.
This COVID thing, we haven't chatted about it, has raised a lot of questions, as we would all have anticipated, about the NFL's handling of this and the decisions that they've made with regard to which games are played and which games are postponed or whatever. How do you feel the league has handled this? Do you have a perspective on what they perhaps should have been doing?
Well, I honestly think the league and the networks, and I've worked for Fox now for a long time, and we had Zoom seminars prior to the season about all of the health and safety protocols, and I think they are overall doing a terrific job, both the league and the networks and everybody involved. The players wear these tracers, these bracelets every day, and they're getting tested every day, and we're getting tested. As far as moving along with the season, they put certain protocol and criteria in place. And, I think there have been some moving parts as the season has gone along, but they've managed to get to week 13 so far and haven't had to go to that rumored week 18 yet. We'll see what happens if they have to push the playoffs back. But, I do know that all of the health and safety protocols, have been handled, terrifically by both the league and the network.
Dare I remind you, you're doing a Wednesday game that should have been played last Thursday.
Yeah.
Thursday, then Sunday, and then Tuesday. So
yeah.
I have all the notes ready as far as the last Wednesday game and how many Wednesday games have been played. But early in the season, we saw a couple of games moved around, and when they moved this game to Tuesday and then Wednesday, it affected a couple of games this coming weekend. So, like I said, a lot of moving parts, and hopefully they can get through like the NBA and the NHL did in their bubbles.
One of the magic things and one of the things that the networks with the NFL have done so right for so long was access. Whether it's 2 days before at practice, the day before with coaches and key players. How, when your regular Fox situation, like you're doing, I think you're doing Saints Falcons this weekend. When you do a game like that, what's your contact with the coaching staff? What's your contact with, are you going to be able to talk to Hill? Are you going to be able to talk to Matt Ryan? And I assume that would all be done virtually.
You are correct. It's been a lot different this year. For 26 years, I would always go in on Friday morning with the crew and go to practice, home team practice, and then sit down with 4 or 5 players and coaches. And we would do the same thing on Saturday in the hotel when the visiting team arrived in the city. This year, everything is via Zoom. On one hand, I always think it's better in person when you're in a room with somebody, when you can shake their hand, when they're looking at you from a couple of feet away across the table. However, having said that, obviously we're doing it this way for health and safety reasons. It's worked out very well. All of the teams have been very cooperative. Tomorrow, which is Thursday, we'll have our crew conference call where we talk about some ideas, sort of a pre-production meeting. On Friday, we'll do Zooms with the Falcons. So we'll speak with Raheem Morris, their head coach, Matt Ryan, offensive coordinator Dirk Cutter, some other players. But we'll do that from our homes and then fly Friday night. We're flying a little bit later than usual. And then Saturday, we'll do the same thing via Zoom with the Saints. So we'll chat with Sean Payton and Taysom Hill and some of the other coaches and players. So it's gone pretty well, I have to admit. And this could be the wave of the future, with some of the new technology. I would say we're getting pretty much the same information that we normally would in person. So we still get everybody that we normally would in person. And in some ways, it's actually worked out even better because you're not wasting a lot of time traveling to a hotel, to a practice facility. So that there's time saved to get some other work done as well, since we do all of the interviews via Zoom.
Yeah, well, that was actually where I was going to go next, because many have opined that maybe this is the future, even after COVID is under control, that the teams, especially the leagues, the individual players and coaches, prefer this to what has happened, well, since the beginning of time previously. Do you think that's realistic, or do you think the networks will fight against this?
I think it might wind up somewhere in the middle. I'm not sure if the networks will fight it as much as print reporters, who cover the teams on a daily basis, who really need that access to build personal relationships. I thought the NHL did a terrific job during the playoffs with the daily Zooms with players and coaches. But I could see, the argument on the other side for reporters who work for newspapers and, websites and other publications, that you're getting the same stuff as everybody else. So I would think that the solution down the line, once we're past COVID and there are vaccines in place, will probably wind up somewhere in between. Now, it's also a lot different for us on game day, on Sundays or on Wednesdays today with the Ravens-Steelers game, but normally on Sundays for me, we all rent our own cars. We don't go in groups. We drive to the stadium ourselves. There aren't a lot of fans in most cities, so there's no traffic. There's no issue getting in. And normally, I would spend about 45 minutes to an hour with my broadcast partner down in the field from 11 until noon or so, just getting last-minute nuggets, chatting with a couple of people, just kind of soaking in the atmosphere and the vibe down on the field. You can't do that this year, obviously. We get to the stadium around 11. We go right up to the booth. There aren't a lot of people in there wearing masks. So, that's one thing I miss is that hour just standing down on the field from 11 to 12, soaking in the atmosphere and maybe chatting with a couple of players and coaches as well.
Well, a few more weeks for this regular season and then the postseason, of course, but hopefully it'll be the last that fellows like yourself have to go through the protocols that you currently do. We'll let you go. It's a game day, as we understand. So we thank you very much. It's great to see you, great to chat with you, and hopefully we'll have a chance to do it again in the not too distant future. Thanks, Kenny.
Well, John, Bob, really appreciate it. Always enjoy chatting with you guys. Hope you and your families and all the listeners and viewers stay safe and healthy. And we'll look forward to watching NHL hockey hopefully soon. And Bob, good luck to the Cleveland Browns.
Yeah, well, they'll need it, as you well know. Thanks, Kenny. We'll talk again. Bye-bye. That's Kenny Albert on the podcast. We wanted to take a couple of seconds before we say goodbye today to acknowledge a mutual friend who passed away 10 years ago this month. Jim Kelley was a longtime writer for the Buffalo Evening News when it was called that, and lived in the suburbs of Buffalo. And we started chatting with him on a regular basis as a guest on the program. And I don't remember the chronology of events, but he started coming up periodically to co-host the show, and then started doing it regularly. And he would drive in from Buffalo on either Sunday night or Monday morning. He'd stay at a hotel just down the street from the radio station and wander up and do the show every afternoon. And then at least twice a week would wind up at my kitchen table, joining me and my family for dinner. So Jim was more than just a colleague. He was he became a very, very close friend. And I don't think of him often enough, but I certainly has not been out of my mind, John, all this week. And he was tough as a writer when he had to be. He certainly was at Hasek. He got into the big feud
in the hallway at the arena in Buffalo. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So he could be tough and honest, but away from the business, he was the kindest, gentlest, nicest guy you'd ever want to meet.
So my world with Jim Kelley was started a little earlier than that. I was running a couple of television shows, one in the United States on cable about the NHL, and then Hockey Night in Canada. And Jim at the time was the president of the Professional Hockey Writers Association. So invariably, every Stanley Cup final, we had Jim on in what we thought was the last game of the season to explain the voting for the Conn Smythe Trophy. And Jim was glib, and he was quick, and he was fun, and we became friends through that. And then in 1994 and 95, when I ran Hockey Night in Canada and created this thing in the second intermission called the Satellite Hot Stove, I wanted to make sure that we had some different voices on the network every once in a while. And it just so happened the first time the official Satellite Hot Stove went on the air in January of 1995 from Maple Leaf Gardens. John Davidson was at Madison Square Garden in New York. Jim Houston was in Vancouver. And our first panelist with Ron McLean was Jim Kelley. And so Jim became a bit of a regular on the Satellite Hot Stove. And then when we created a little channel in Southern Ontario called Leafs TV, Jim became a regular, when I say regular, once a month contributor to a Sunday morning 2-hour talk show called The Reporters. And that's really how Jim got to come to Canada as much as he did, being a writer. And I introduced Jim to Nelson Millman and Mike Gentili, and that's how his start on the radio station came as we were doing primetime sports. So, and then it just so happened, unfortunately, when Jim got sick, I was returning from my time at the NHL, and I replaced Jim on the show, as you recall. So Jim was I tell you what, Jim was an old-fashioned newspaper guy.
Oh yeah,
an old-fashioned newspaper guy. He was cut from that cloth. He was honest, but in so many ways he was fair. And you could never, players could get mad at him for his criticism, but he would say to them, well, what was it that I said that was wrong? And so many times athletes would go to him and say, well, you didn't say anything was wrong, you just brought it up. I said, well, that's, in many ways, that was his job, was to tell the truth and to be analytical, but to be fair. And Jim Kelley, in so many ways, was fair all the time. And the way he passed from pancreatic cancer, that was the only thing in his life that wasn't fair.
And I know many know the story already, but a mere hours before he passed away, Jim actually filed his last story, which should tell you everything you need to know about him.
Yeah.
He was dedicated to his job in even the most dire circumstances. And one of those guys you'll never forget.
He's a good man. He was a good man, a good family man. And you know what? Your point about not thinking about him enough is really a good one. And I think this week, we've, through talking to people in Buffalo, including our friend Mike Harrington, I think we've really realized how much we've missed him for the last decade.
I certainly have. I can tell you that. Mr. Shannon, I thank you as always. We'll reconvene here in a couple of days. I assume we will have a roundtable for the audience.
Indeed, we will.
We thank you all for watching or listening. We'll see you in 48 hours. Goodbye.
Cheers.